A listing contract is also called a listing agreement, and it acts as a contract between a real estate broker and a seller who is the owner of real property. The listing contract gives the broker the authority to act on behalf of the seller as an agent in the sale of real property included in the agreement. The people who sign the contract include the principal, the seller, and the broker. As a real estate agent, you will act as a salesperson on behalf of your broker. For example, if your neighbor comes to you and asks you to put his or her house on the market, you may prepare the listing agreement, but you will not be able to sign it. You have to get your broker to sign it. Your broker is the legal owner of the relationship. Anatomy of a listing contract. A listing contract will contain the following parts. 1. Duration of the listing contract. The length of the contract can be 3 months, 6 months, a year, or any other period you choose. The seller will want to keep this as short as possible in order to be able to terminate the relationship if no sale occurs. The broker will need to ensure the period is long enough to cover the time and effort, as well as the expense of marketing the home. 2. Sales price. This is the desired price of the seller, which should reflect a realistic amount a buyer would be willing to pay. 3. Sales commission. The commission is always negotiable between the principal and broker. If the commission rate is too low, a listing broker may fail to push the house in all effective advertising channels. The selling broker may concentrate on other prospects with a higher commission potential. 4. Exceptions to commission. This absolves the seller in whole or part from paying commission if they find a buyer themselves. Generally, if the seller finds their own buyer, they had to have listed them in the listing agreement as a potential buyer. The seller usually pays very close attention to the listing agreement and will likely request a lawyer to review it. It is vital that the seller understands what they are signing. Once a broker presents a willing and able buyer, if all conditions have been fulfilled, the seller owes the broker his or her full commission. This holds true unless the terms of the listing agreement say otherwise. If the seller chooses not to sell, if for instance he is not happy with sales price or decided not to move, the commission must still be paid unless the terms of the listing agreement are altered to account for it. For example, the seller could have appended a note to the agreement, such as, "Commission is payable at close of escrow, dependent upon the close of escrow." Exclusive right to sell agreement. The exclusive right to sell agreement is a listing agreement wherein a broker agrees to act as agent for the seller of real property, where under the terms of the agreement, the broker is entitled to a commission if the property is sold during the time the agreement is in effect. This includes any buyers brought in by the seller or another broker with or without the services of an agent. The exclusive right to sell agreement is the most commonly used listing contract and the one that offers the most protection to the broker. With very limited exceptions, it provides that the broker will receive a commission on the sale of the home for a certain period of time. Even if the seller finds a buyer through another broker or finds their own buyer, the listing broker will receive a commission. Sometimes, if a seller has interested buyers, they have them excluded from the agreement. However, it is likely that some small fees and/or commission will still be required by the listing broker to compensate for their time and expenses. In exclusive right-to-sell listings, one broker acts as the sole agent of the seller and has exclusive rights to represent the property while the contract is in effect. The broker receives a commission even if another broker or the owner sells the property. Let's discuss an example of how this might occur. Bill wants to sell his home and hires broker Justin as his listing broker. Before signing the exclusive right-to-sell agreement, Bill runs into his old neighbor, Tom, at a friend's pool party. Tom says that he has been trying to move back to the neighborhood, but that there were rarely any listings. Justin claps him on the shoulder and says that maybe they could help each other out. Tom is unable to commit right away, but wants to be considered a potential buyer for the property. With a sigh, Bill realizes he will have to go ahead and sign the exclusive right-to-sell agreement with Justin, but he wants a break on the commission should Tom come back with a solid offer. Justin reluctantly agrees to waive the commission if Tom buys the home, on the condition that he is reimbursed for his MLS fees and the costs of advertising. They shake on it, but since verbal agreements aren't legally binding, Justin adds it to the exclusive right-to-sell agreement. What happens if the seller is unhappy with an offer? If the seller is unhappy with the sales price offered, she can turn it down, even with an exclusive right-to-sell agreement. If the listing broker failed to advertise the property or make a solid effort to act in the seller's best interest, the seller has recourse to break the contract. From the seller perspective, the exclusive right-to-sell agreement is the most restrictive and gives the seller far less control than other types of agreements. If at all possible, the seller will opt for a less restrictive contract. Exclusive Agency Agreement. In the exclusive agency agreement, the seller employs a broker as the sole agent for the seller of real property. In this role, the broker will receive a commission if the property is sold through another broker. But the broker receives no commission if the sale is negotiated by the owner without the services of an agent. With the exclusive agency listing, the broker will receive a commission only if he or she procures the buyer, or if the seller hires a single broker as the exclusive agent of the property owner, or if the seller retains the right to sell the property independently without paying commission. Difference between exclusive right to sell and exclusive agency. When you examine the actual contracts, the difference boils down to a few words buried in the text. Even though the difference is small, with the rest of the forms being nearly identical, they have a big impact on whether the listing firm will be entitled to compensation for certain types of sales. An exclusive right to sell agreement offers the listing firm commission if a sale occurs, and it doesn't matter whether the broker, the seller, or someone else procured the sales. The listing broker gets paid in all cases. On the other hand, an exclusive agency agreement stipulates that the seller only pays the commission if the listing firm or another real estate firm finds the buyer. So, in a nutshell, this means that there will be situations where the listing firm is not entitled to compensation, even if the property sold. In the exclusive agency agreement, if the listing firm or another firm secures a buyer, only then has a claim on compensation. Here is an example. After entering into an exclusive agency agreement with XYZ brokerage firm, Mark decided to sell his property to his cousin John. John found out about the house being available for sale from Mark's daughter at a family event and did not speak to the listing broker or any other brokerages regarding the listing. In this case, John will probably not have to pay any commission since the buyer was procured through his own efforts and knowledge. In the same example, imagine that John first found out about the house being up for sale through property listings that his agent emailed him from the multiple listing service. In this case, the listing broker and the buyer broker might argue that they are entitled to compensation. They have to prove that their efforts produced the buyer first, which can be difficult to do. In the same situation, under an exclusive right to sell, the listing firm could still claim the right to compensation no matter how John learned of the property's availability. These examples show the true intention of the exclusive right to sell, to protect listing brokers who have produced a ready, willing, and able buyer. This includes the seller finding a buyer for the property. Open listing. An open listing is an authorization by the owner of real property to a real estate agent that gives the agent the non-exclusive right to secure a purchaser. Open listings may be given to any number of agents without liability to compensate any except the one who first secures a buyer ready, willing, and able to meet the terms of the listing, or secures the acceptance by the seller of a satisfactory offer. An open listing is a non-exclusive, unilateral real estate contract. This means that more than one broker may be employed to sell a single property, and the owners may act on their own behalf to procure a buyer without being liable for commissions to the listing brokers. In an open listing, the owner of the home agrees to pay a commission to whoever procures a ready and willing buyer first. Therefore, it offers brokers the lowest level of protection when compared to other types of listing agreements. A unilateral contract is a legally enforceable promise entered into by competent parties that obligates one party to do a specified legal service for another. A unilateral contract specifies the conditions under which one person pays the other to perform a certain duty. If and when the duty is fulfilled, funds are exchanged. In the case of real estate, this means that the listing broker who secures the buyer gets paid, but that no listing broker is obligated to secure a buyer. A non-exclusive agreement means two parties are entering agreement that services will be performed. but more than one party may be contracted to perform the same services. An open listing might be viable for a broker if the property will be very easy to sell or in a superheated market where buyers are willing to pay higher prices, and when finding a buyer is not an issue. Homeowners present this to as many brokers as possible. Brokers may already have interested clients and pursue the listing. However, since an open listing is not exclusive, it is difficult for any one broker to complete the sale. Most brokers will not have much interest in pursuing it. In reality, most brokers ignore open listings on the MLS since there's no guarantee they'll earn the commission. Because of this, open listings are not very common. Here's an example. Donna decides to sell her home using an open listing, which she sends to dozens of brokers in the area. It takes a few months, but since the market is hot and the home is relatively new, with many improvements that increase the value, she eventually is contacted by a broker, Mike, with a willing and able buyer. During the walkthrough, the buyer gives Donna her business card, and she later contacts Donna. They agree on a sales price and decided to circumvent the broker who facilitated the sale. Mike could pursue legal action, but doesn't, chalking it up to a lesson learned. Net listing. In a net listing, the seller tells the real estate agent what price they want to get out of the listing. The agent then adds their desired commission to the net price. Net listings are fraught with peril and are illegal in some states. Here are some things that can go wrong in a net listing agreement. If the agent obtains a purchase offer far in excess of the seller's net sales price, the seller may feel like they have been treated unfairly or accuse the sales agent of undervaluing the market value of the home to inflate their commission. If the agent receives a low purchase offer too close to the net price, they can receive little or no commission for their efforts, yielding the listing agent little or no compensation. This presents a temptation not to present the offer to the seller. Here is an example. Rosa accepted a net listing from Donald to list his home for sale. The fair market value of the home comes in at $590,000. Rosa decides to list the property at $613,000, which includes a 4% sales commission. Recent sales in the community indicate that this would generate interest and procure a buyer in a reasonable period of time. Rosa received 1 to 2 offers below the asking price, which she presents to Donald, despite some hesitation due to the lower commission that she will receive. Donald agrees to wait for a better offer so that Rosa will not be shorted on her commission. The market takes a sudden downturn, with comparable homes in the same community selling for $580,000. Donald approaches Rosa to lower the asking price, which she refuses to do based on the impact on her commission. In this case, Rosa has a conflict between protecting her own financial interests and acting in the best interest of her client. This is one example of how net listings create a danger to both the seller and the listing broker. A better alternative is an exclusive right-to-sell listing that includes a reasonable listing price formed as the net sales price plus the listing agent's sales commission. terminating a contract. It is important to note that every listing contract is different. As an agent or broker, you have the right to include clauses and stipulations to protect yourself and/or the seller. It is a good idea to verbally review the contract with the seller to ensure they are aware of what they are agreeing to. To avoid misunderstanding, point out any clauses that you add pertaining to the circumstances under which they will be able to terminate the contract, also called the cancellation clauses. If the listing broker fails to procure a buyer within the time limit of the listing contract, usually 3, 6, or 9 months, then the contract is null and void at the end of the stated period. For this reason, brokers usually place a few clauses in their listing contracts to prevent sellers from circumventing the agreement. One clause prevents the seller from canceling a listing agreement without the real estate agent's written agreement. Another termination clause states that if an agent has brought a buyer who is willing and able to the closing table, she has earned her commission at that time. So, if the seller unreasonably turns down an offer, they could be liable to pay the commission anyway. While it is good to include this protection in the listing agreement, it is important to execute such clauses with caution. An unhappy seller can quickly tarnish an agent and broker's reputation and impact future sales. Another clause that is good to include in your listing agreement places constraints on the sale of the home to anyone the listing agent has shown it to. The seller will not be able to sell the home to these prospects within 6 months to 1 year after the contract ends.